بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Peace, love, light. Welcome back to the Travelers Podcast. I'm Brother Ali. I'm so grateful that you're here. I say every week this is a dope episode because we got a dope guest. And I also say that this is one I've been looking forward to. I've wanted to do this podcast for a long time, and there are just so many amazing, inspirational just leaders and ambassadors in my life that I'm so happy to be able to share. So in my mind, I've had this podcast idea running for many years, and there's this list of people that I'm like, as soon as we get these mics open, I gotta have this person here to tell their story and share their wisdom. And so a lot of times I'm starting these podcasts by saying this, but the guest that we have this week is really, really profoundly inspirational and just such a blessing to me. Somebody I learned so much from. Mokhtar Alkhanshali is a Yemeni-American brother. He's a young guy. He's a really handsome, well-dressed, sharp, just really intelligent, but also very deeply sincere, loving, kind-hearted, warm person. Like when you're around him, you're just really taken by how sincere he is and how he's very like worldly and wise, but he's also very like sweet, kind, like kid in some ways. Um, there is a best-selling, New York Times best-selling book called The Monk of Mocha that was written by and with Dave Eggers, who's written these really incredible tales of people from around the world. He wrote this book about our dear brother Mukhtar because of the fact that Mukhtar, grew up. His family's from Yemen. He was born in Liverpool. When he was really young, they moved to Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and his father was one of these like Arab American bodega owners that you hear about that are conflicted because he's Muslim, but he also is selling all the stuff they sell in the bodega. He's selling alcohol and blunt wraps and cheap food and all of this stuff. And their family was doing pretty well, but coming from this really highly spiritual group of people, this profoundly virtuous people that they come from in Yemen. Many of the families there have a direct lineage to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so there is an internal struggle that goes on with these store owners. And shout out to my man Rami Neshashibi on the south side of Chicago and in Atlanta, who runs the group Iman. That he's a Palestinian American that works directly with a lot of the Palestinian owners of the bodegas and corner stores in the south side of Chicago and in Atlanta. That this is something that it is a reality in urban America. So Mukhtar's father felt conflicted about it, and so he left. He closed his business, and they went to the Bay Area. And so they went from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn to the Tenderloin, which is, I mean, the soil, hood, like the real thing. And we talk about it in this conversation. And Mukhtar grew up being around a lot of hustling and around a lot of stuff, but he really outlines in that book and in this conversation the fact that he grew up with the knowing his ancestral past and the connection to the earliest traditions of the earliest Muslims, and also learning a lot from hip hop music and culture, and from Black writers and singers and cultural creators, and then also activism and organizing coming from the Bay Area, which of course is the home of the Black Panthers. And he's learning so much from activism and organizing related to the Black freedom struggle. And so he's looking for like, what's going to be the thing that I do in life, and eventually discovers coffee and learns that coffee originated in Yemen. And it's this beautiful marriage of a bean that comes from Ethiopia, a plant from Ethiopia, that is brought to Yemen by Sufi scholars, monks, sages, saints, these prominent people that have this deep spiritual practice. And they create the coffee industry as we know it now. And then it spreads throughout the world through the Ottoman Empire. And we recorded this with me being here in Istanbul, Turkey, in my new home. So the way that all of this is brought together is so, so beautiful. And it's really important to me that, people tend to see coffee the same way that we saw for a long time organic food, as something that's for bourgeoisie, people with a lot of money. that that's something that people in the suburbs do. Like that's something that rich white people do. But the reality is that this is all natural stuff that's produced by people of color from around the world, working class, people that live with the land and on the land and that have a relationship with the land. And so what's happening in the organic movement and the, alkaline food movement and this movement to really reclaim things like urban farming and et cetera is to get back to what colonialism took away from people, what the worst of capitalism took away from people of all backgrounds, of all cultures, of all walks of life, who lived with the land and who, they love the land and the land loved them. The relationship that happens between the people and the creation and the beautiful things that it produces. And coffee is one of those really, really beautiful products and legacies that is so emblematic of what's happened in the world in terms of colonial and hyper capitalist powers coming in and really taking something that's very natural and beautiful and spiritual and a ritual and turning it into this like disgusting commodity. And the long road back to reconnecting with this beautiful natural ritual practice that ties the people of the world together in such a beautiful way. So I'm going to shut up now and we'll get to our brother Mukhtar. Thank you so much for listening. Please enjoy this episode. If you get a chance, check out the book that Dave Eggers wrote about and with our brother Mokhtar Alkhanshali that's called The Monk of Mocha. We're brought to you, as always, by Zakat Foundation. You'll hear that Mukhtar has also worked with Zakat Foundation. You were brought to you by Udamentary. You'll hear that Mukhtar has worked with Udamentary. You're just going to hear how all of the stuff that we talk about in this podcast really comes together in the beautiful reality of original coffee. So enjoy this episode of the Travelers Podcast. Assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
كيف الحال حبيب؟
I am wonderful now that I can see your beautiful face.
Allah, mashallah. Happy to see you.
I've known about you for a long time, Brother Ali, and it's for me speaking to you is like this is still very surreal. Um, Being able to know you as a friend, as a mentor, because I don't know if I told you, but part of my daily routine is in the morning, after I start my day with my spiritual connotations and what I do, I listen to your music.
Subhanallah.
It's like my part of my earliest thing I do. And it's no matter where I am, I could be traveling in Yemen, a mountain of our villages there. I could be in Tokyo, but it's like um it's just I learned early on that a lot what you listen to affects you mentally throughout the day. And then your songs just like resonate with me. They're very positive. They have this depth of something that I strive to find a lot in music, which is authenticity or just something real, and you open up you're a great storyteller too, which I like because I grew up in before I came to SF in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Bedford Stuyvesant, the livest one, represent BK to the fullest. And Biggie was for me my favorite storyteller. So I love hearing your words because what I also find with you is that you have this way about talking about social justice and history, and I see that in Tupac. So I find like a lot of your language connects between storytelling, but also telling important realities, and then you have this like spiritual part of you, which I would say like Donny Hathaway, someone I look up to for that. Maybe like even Bill Withers, Erykah Badu too, Yassine Bey, like, and so it's really wonderful for me to talk to you right now. I really appreciate you for being my friend.
Subhanallah. It's beautiful, man. You're mentioning all my favorite people. You know what I mean? Those are all my favorite. Subhanallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. What I'm interested in is really kind of the three spheres that I think that you bring together and that are so beautiful. is I would like to help people to understand more about what coffee is, and then also the history of coffee, and then also your personal story. And I think that the way that they all overlap and align is just so beautiful. I feel like in speaking about coffee as its own enigma, its own phenomenon, its own reality, even before getting into the history of coffee, what I find is that, I really learned about the beauty of coffee in the Bay, and, the beautiful connection between Ethiopia and Yemen, and the Bay and some other port cities around the world, is that most people are intimidated by the topic of coffee because they're aware that it's an ocean of knowledge that feels, really difficult to access. I think there are probably a lot of people that just, they don't want to get into wine because, I mean, we don't drink wine, but there are people that feel like, man, I'm not the type of person that would study all of that. Or there are people that don't get into vinyl because or jazz. Coffee feels a lot like jazz. Like people know that like there's an ocean of stuff to be known, and I don't know if I could ever know it.
Mm,
And so people end up just listening to whatever is on the radio. And it also, I think, feels like something that people with a lot of money are able to experience and appreciate. And like so many, like jazz, and like so many things, coffee comes to us from Africa, from the Middle East, from Central and South America, places where, um, black and brown communities of people that in America, oftentimes because of the economic and political realities, might not have a lot of money, feel like, well, that's something that somebody else enjoys. That's something that white people are like. You know what I mean? And it's such a sin and a crime because of the fact that like these are communities that these beautiful these beautiful resources come from. So I wonder, for people that are looking to understand coffee better, what are some of the things that you would like to introduce for people to understand?
I appreciate that question because you're giving people some tools here. And I think and it's not their fault. Honestly, most of the time, the coffee community, some people in the community have a bit of an ego and they like to be different. And they like the fact that I know something that you don't know. And they almost purposely are pretentious and use these kind of highfalutin words and jargon to kind of throw people off. And I was actually one of those people. Believe it or not, I didn't like coffee until maybe 8 years ago, 9 years ago now. I thought, for the same reasons you mentioned, I thought it was just something that it was just so too geeky and technical. The coffee I was exposed to was not that great. I had to put a lot of sugar and cream just to make it drinkable. I mostly drank it for the caffeine. If I needed to study for exams or drive late night, and and I think this my story of the cup that changed my life can answer this question probably better than I can. I was, in college, um, actually early 20s, trying to figure out my place in life and purpose in life. At the same time, I was reading these books that are very critical on race and class, books by authors like Frantz Fanon, Edward Said, James Baldwin.
Mhm.
They were just these books just really opened my eyes to the world, and so I realized, wow, this is like there's a system that's keeping people who look like me or from the global south. It's not by chance that my neighborhood I grew up were all like that. In this phase where I was really kind of bitter and like kind of not bitter, just like unhappy with where I am because I'm not where I want to be. I walked into a coffee shop after a friend of mine had told me about this statue of a Yemeni monk next to where my job, where I was working at the time as a doorman. And so I was like, let me go across the street and see what she's talking about. It was the building was owned by the Hills brothers. Previously, it's old coffee company back in the 1900s, like up until 1970s, and they chose for their logo this Arab monk, Yemeni monk, who was drinking a cup of coffee. And so it's a longer story, but I started to research and I learned about the Islamic tradition of coffee, and
Hmm.
we can get into that in a bit. And then just fast forward, it's okay. I got to go try coffee now. I have to try this coffee out. And I was like, where do I have coffee? And I looked online. And I was like, oh, you need to go to a specialty coffee shop. I'm like, okay. I Googled that, and there was one place called Blue something, Blue Bottle. At the time, I wasn't sure what that was. And so I go to the Mint Plaza, which is on on Fourth Street in San Francisco, between Market and Mission Street. I walked in there, and I remember there was a coffee that was $5. I was like, why would coffee cost that much money? Who can pay $5 for coffee?
Hmm.
My father used to have a bodega in Brooklyn, and we pay, that's $1.50 for a cup of coffee, like. And so I was like, you know what, I'll try it out. It was a cup of coffee. It was from Ethiopia, a Yugurchef natural, a Galana, from this one
Hmm.
farm, natural process. And I had this coffee, and I remember drinking it, and I was like, because it was
Yeah.
black, first of all. I was kind of like I was kind of intimidated because I've never had black coffee really. I just
Hmm.
cream sugar, and I was about to, and then the barista. I got very lucky. I probably would not be talking to you, maybe, if it wasn't for this barista that I met. He looked at me. He's like, you know what? Why don't you try it first without cream or sugar? Just see how you like it, and then you add if you want. I said, all right. I tried it, and I was like, I tasted blueberries. I tasted honeysuckle.
Yeah.
It was sweet. It wasn't bitter. It had this like lingering aftertaste. I was like floral. I'm like, hey, like, what did you put in here? Like, what kind of flavor did you put in here? He's like, we didn't put any flavor in here. I was like, well, how does it taste like this? I'm used to this like coffee that tastes like burnt popcorn. It's like
Right.
you have to put cream and sugar to make it drinkable. He's like, no, this is the way coffee is supposed to taste like when you do things right. I said, what does that mean? He's like, we have a direct relationship with this community in Ethiopia. We have a green buyer who goes there, yearly, and meets with them, and we pay them more money to produce better coffee, and we, find people like you who can appreciate them. And in my mind, I was like blown away because I'm like, wow, this is a sustainable model for impact that people get paid more for it. This thing tastes delicious. I have this ancestry around coffee. I was like, at that time, I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I'm like, this is like, so, to answer your question, like, I think it's not usually the people's fault. It's just like, it's a lot to take in. There's so much that goes from the pour of the coffee from the farmer all the way to that cup you're
Hmm.
tasting. And I think people should take the time to to learn that journey. Maybe not all at once. Take your time, learn something, but start to learn that journey,
Hmm.
appreciate it, and appreciate the artists that touched your coffee. And that's a problem in America, which is a whole other topic, that people just don't know where their food comes from or the clothes. And I think sometimes if you did, you'd feel more guilty because you know the conditions of people who are producing these things for us.
That's right. Yes, sir.
So my thing for people is go and start to learn that story, that journey, and then and I believe you'll be really pleasantly surprised on what you learn.
One of the great resources for that I always recommend to people is the book about you and your journey called Monk of Mocha. And there are people that mistakenly think that you are the Monk of Mocha. You might be our Monk of Mocha, but the Monk of Mocha is a different
Oh
person. But
gosh.
I think that for a lot of people, it's like, where do I start? And when I first started listening to jazz music, the producer of this podcast, BK1, my first DJ, was like, just start with the things that are really popular and just listen to it on your own and try to be present with it and figure out, first of all, what do I like to hear? You know? Um, so I know one of the experience that you had with going to Blue Bottle, or people can go to the specialty coffee shops that roast their own beans in their own area, you know drink different coffees, experience different coffees, let it cool a little bit so that you can actually taste it. That's one of the things. Like, don't put cream and sugar. Don't you know just drink the coffee by itself, let it cool a little bit, maybe get a few different varieties and taste them. But in terms of learning about coffee, people educating themselves about coffee, are there certain documentaries? Are there certain books? Are there certain podcasts? Like, what are some of the good entrance points?
And so for me, like, there's a couple of really important books, and people like my book because a lot of those books are academic, and my story is more of a personal story, and it's not just about coffee. But if you want to learn about coffee, in terms of history, there's a beautiful book called The Merchant Houses of Mocha, Mocha, by Dr. Nancy Um, The Merchant House of Mocha. It's a phenomenal book that really brings to life the city of Mocha, which is a port city in Yemen, and how it spread coffee. I thought that was a wonderful book. If you're looking for a really powerful book on the economic history of coffee, uh, there's a book called Coffee: A Global History, and it really goes through the history of coffee and the different waves and the different the economics behind coffee. Those are two really good books. If you're looking to a few other books that help with, oh, and there's actually a really great BBC documentary, an audio documentary that a dear friend of mine named Abdurrahman Malik he did.
Hmm.
He's one of the greatest orators that I know and storytellers. He's just a phenomenal, beautiful soul. It's called the Mohammedan Bean, the secret Islamic history of coffee. And it's a beautiful uh, audio journey and history of coffee. He brings to life so many different touch points. So those are three that I would recommend, just kind of off the top of my head, for people to kind of jump into. There's also another one called The Devil's Cup, and the title comes from Pope Clement VIII in 1600. When coffee started to spread in Europe, he called an evil Mohammedan being, and he actually had a papal decree to ban coffee consumption for Christians, and they did. And the people were really like angry, and the merchants, and so they finally convinced him to have a sip of coffee. And this is not me making this up. You can go and research this. After his first sip, he fell in love with coffee so much. He said, "It would be a sin to have this beverage strictly for the infidels, meaning us." And he baptized the coffee beans. And he called it the Devil's Cup. That's where the name comes from. So those are the books, and a few of the books that I would definitely recommend. And in terms of movies or videos, there's a documentary called Black Gold. My friend Tedesse from Ethiopia. It's a pretty good documentary. Black Gold. When it came out, Starbucks was really put in the hot seat. It's
Hmm.
on just like, I mean, there's a scene in the beginning where this amazing man Tedesse, who was one of the main organizers for the Oromio Cooperative Union, this huge union for farmers in Ethiopia, the largest, and he goes and he brings the bags of coffee to these farmers in Ethiopia in his village, sitting down on the dirt. He's like, "Do you know how much a cup of your coffee costs in America?" And they don't even know. And he tells them, they're like, "Wow." And so it's a cool story. It's a good documentary. But unfortunately, there isn't much in the visual world of coffee in terms of like film or like documentary yet. And so I hope to work on a few projects that definitely will talk to you about and let you know more about as they develop on this issue.
So for people to just understand some of the basic terms that that for people to understand that there are different flavor profiles in coffee, there are different ways that coffee is produced. Um, some of the terms that come up are like Arabica and Robusto, um, what are the differences in those two flavor profiles? How do they get that way? I know that elevation has a lot to do with them. That coffee and raised in higher elevation are usually sweeter, and that they usually have less caffeine, whereas things that are produced in lower elevation usually are more full-bodied and have more caffeine. But what are and people talk about Starbucks was really big on coming out and saying like we do dark roast, and so there are people that really got caught up on like
Mm-mm.
I like this roast or that roast. But when people are starting to get into really appreciating different flavor profiles of coffee, what are some of the important things to know and some of the important language to understand?
I really love talking about these topics and trying to connect the dots in a really easy way. And so you mentioned earlier something very interesting, that coffee is grown by people of color, indigenous people around the world. And it's interesting that coffee grows around between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. It's called the coffee belt, right? You have to have a certain elevation, climate for it. It literally can only be grown by people of color.
That's right.
It doesn't grow anywhere in Europe or North America. It grows in Hawaii and Kona, And there's some farms, a couple of farms that friends of mine have in California, but commercially, it only grows around people of color, and whether it's in Thailand or Indonesia, whether it's in Africa, and Ethiopia, Kenya, whether it's in Guatemala, El Salvador, for some reason, God decided to plant this around these
Mhm.
people, which is something
Mhm.
something there. And so, in terms of like looking at things scientifically, there's a few people that uh, I look into as teachers in the world of coffee science, in terms of science. A friend of mine, Dr. Mario Fernandez, who has a PhD in coffee processing, he works for the Coffee Quality Institute, an amazing nonprofit that actually has like they certify a kind of like a coffee sommelier program to be a
Mhm.
certified taster.
Mhm.
It's a 22-part exam to be. You go through like the different flavor profiles, acids, roast profiles. One of the exams, I had to learn 36 different smells for coffee, and I actually became the first Arabica coffee taster. And to that point, in the world of coffee, I'm probably the only Yemeni who thinks that coffee began in Ethiopia.
Yeah, I've heard you say that.
um, but actually, I'm not the only one. We had an academic symposium. We held Yemen's first academic symposium through my nonprofit, the Mocha Institute, this year, and we had a professor from the University of Hodeidah come, phenomenal individual who gave it an amazing lecture on the history of coffee and how it spread from Ethiopia and Yemen, and who the monk of Mocha was, Sheikh Ali ibn Umar Shadali, who was actually from the Shadali Tariqa Sufi order, and how he had left Yemen to go to Mecca to teach, and then to Cairo. And in Cairo, he had a dream to go to Harar, Ethiopia. And he goes down to Harar, and as he's there, there's an emir, a Muslim leader who's fighting another group of people, and he sees this man who just had this beautiful aura around his face and asks him to pray for them. He makes prayer to them. They win this battle. He begs him to stay. He's like, no, I have to go back to my people. He's like, you can marry. I want you to marry my sister. So he marries this Ethiopian woman. He lives there, and he sees them chewing these weird cherries off
Mhm.
these trees. And he asks them, like, what are you doing here? They're like, oh, these berries. They give us like energy, and they give us like they make us like excited, and they would actually
Did they
wrap
used
it
to
around.
chew them with animal fat?
They would wrap it around animal fat. It was like this I call it an early keto diet.
Mm.
and so they would do it, before long travels, before battles. And so Arabs have this custom of something called droops, which are roasting certain things like roast pistachios or things on the campfire as Bedouins. So he decides, there must be a better way to consume this. So he takes it and figures out how to roast it. And the original way to roast coffee was the whole cherry. He would roast it. And he invents this drink. He calls it Al-Khamr alladhi yuthiru nashwa, the wine that raises you to a state of ecstasy.
Mhm.
So he called it Qahwat al-Bun, the wine of the bun. Bun is an Amharic Ethiopian word for coffee. It's not Arabic. And they use it in Eritrea also, bunna. And actually, it's bunna in Amharic. And so, like, my parents call it bun or bunna in Yemen. And so it's Qahwat al-Bun, the wine of the bun, of this bean. And so, now to answer your question, um, in the world of biology of coffee, we have different species. So in the word, when you talk about the scientific name for coffee, um, there's coffee arabica and coffee canephroa, or also known as robusta. But there's also a few others like Liberica, Excelsior, but they're not much, they're very very little. Arabica represents 74% of the world's production of coffee, and it's pretty much all of the specialty coffee. And robusta is mostly found in countries like Vietnam. So what is it? What are they? Caffeine, as you mentioned, when you look at you mentioned earlier that higher grown coffee are sweeter, and the reason why that um, is because plants produce caffeine. This chemical, what it does, it blocks certain receptors from reaching our brain to let us know we're tired. So it blocks it, and we have this caffeine crash eventually because eventually that goes out, and then it tricks our brain basically. And actually, before I forget, a really great book that just came out. A friend of mine, Michael Pollan, he has a book called your mind on plants.
Mm.
And it's about three different drugs: opium, I think cacti, and then the other one is caffeine. And the chapter about coffee is phenomenal because it talks about the history, it talks about the physical aspects of coffee, how it affects our body, our mind, our sleep patterns. One of my favorite quotes in that book, he says, as German historian Wolfgang Schiffelbusch once quoted, and I always thought that last name was funny,
Right.
ec- in the Middle Ages, the Islamic world was much more advanced in science and mathematics. And for a country, for a people and a culture that forbade alcohol consumption and promoted coffee consumption, there's no doubt that's why it was. One of my favorite quotes in that book. And so Arabica, it leaves Yemen in the 1600s. In that time, it was illegal to sell seeds to foreigners in Yemen. If you sold seedling to a foreigner, you'd be executed.
Hmm.
It's very similar to the Chinese with the silkworm. And so for 200 years, Yemen had a monopoly on coffee. And the Ottoman Turks played a big role because they controlled the port of Mocha and they helped distribute. And so all the world had, like that port was such an amazing place. Every country had ambassadors that came to the port of Mocha. And so the Dutch were the first to set up shop there in the 1600s, followed by the French and the East India Company. The Dutch company that was there is a company called the VOC, Dutch East India Company. And for those who don't know, the VOC is one of the most diabolical
Yes.
and evil organizations that ever existed.
They played a huge hand in the slave trade.
Most of the West Atlantic slave trade happened through this company.
Yes, sir.
We say that, like, Apple is worth $2 trillion. They were apparently worth 8 trillion in our times today from what they did. And so and they took spies into Yemen and they stole 7 seeds out of Yemen and they planted them in Indonesia on the island of Java, and that's where the name Java comes from. And so I'm not going to go into the whole history because it's a longer history. Maybe we could after this question if you want me to. But to answer your question, so Arabica, so the beans that come out of Yemen to Indonesia, the Dutch and the French have a peace treaty. The Dutch give the French a coffee tree. King Louis XV fell in love with coffee. He had his own private nursery in like a greenhouse, one of the first in the world, and he would roast his own beans. A man named Gabriel Declue was able to get cut-ins from the king of France to go to the new quote unquote new world,
Hmm.
and his name was Gabriel Declue in 1721.
Mm.
So he crosses over the Atlantic Ocean. On the journey, they are they get stopped by some Algerian pirates who basically rob them and jack them. And shout out to my Algerian friends who are listening. And they began to ration out their water supply for themselves. And they weren't sure if they were going to make it because they're trying to go to the Caribbeans. Gabriel Declue gave up much of his water to his coffee plant he had in a glass like jar. People thought he was crazy like for doing that, but they make it to the island of Martinique in the Caribbeans, and from there, coffee gets transported to Haiti. In the mid 1800s, Haiti was producing half of the world's coffee, or early 1800s. And when the Haitian people fought for their self determination and their liberation against the French, the retreating French forces burned most of their crops, took those seeds, eventually made it to Central and South America. Now Brazil produces about a third of the world's coffee. That one plant that went from France to the Caribbean, its name is the noble tree, the noble tree. And 90% of the world's coffee production traces back to that one plant. All of Guatemala, El Salvador, Brazil, Latin Mexico, all of them from 7 seeds from Indonesia, from Yemen. And that whole lineage of coffee is called Arabica because it came from Yemen, from Arabia. And so what is different about Arabica is that and what caffeine is a chemical that plants make to kill insects. It's a self-defense thing. So in low elevations, it's very tropical, very humid, a lot more life, a lot more insects, a lot more caffeine. The higher up you go, it gets colder and harsher. Insects can't survive there. And so you need less caffeine. So Cafe Arabica has half the caffeine of Robusta, but double the natural sugars. And that's why our coffees in Yemen are very unique because we have the highest grown coffee in the world. Like they reach some of the coffee, literally, you see clouds around you. Like you're like, where I'm up in the sky at like 7,500 feet above sea
Subhanallah.
level. It's like when I showed people like my elevations and my, from like my compass, they didn't believe me that coffee could be grown this elevation. They're very dense, the beans become. That's why they have flavors. So you find countries like Ethiopia, Kenya, Panama, they have a lot of flavor in their coffees, and the fruity and floral notes come at the high elevation. The lower elevation, like Brazil, Guatemala, you'll taste chocolate notes, more peanuts and almonds, and these kind of flavors there. And that's kind of how it develops. And so Robusta is just it has much more caffeine. Vietnamese coffee, if you ever had a traditional Vietnamese coffee with the condensed cream,
Yeah.
it's because it's so bitter. You have to put something to make it sweeter because the caffeine is so strong. So my friends out there who listen in, if you feel like coffee is, you can't drink the caffeine because it hurts your system, it's too powerful for you, try high elevation coffee Arabica from
Mhm.
countries like Yemen, Kenya, Ethiopia, anything basically above 1,800 meters, 2,000 meters above, that's really going to be, you're going to enjoy that much more.
While we're listening to this conversation with me and Mokhtar Alkhanshali, you just really hear the fact that so much of the things that we talk about on this podcast tie in together. That culture and economics and farming and food, they really are so connected to the reality of the human story and the dignity of the human family. And that's what Zakat Foundation brings together. Zakat Foundation has been really supportive of Mukhtar's nonprofit institute called the Mocha Institute, and the work that they do around the world to really empower coffee growers to control their own destiny, to tell their own stories. Not only in Yemen, but it's branching out around the world, and it's such a beautiful reality. And Mukhtar says in this interview, maybe we haven't got to it at this point, but he talks about the visionary, really nuanced approach that Zakat Foundation has to being a global humanitarian organization. A lot of times, these companies, these global charities, are run like corporations, and they are that. There is some sort of reality that's required there, where you've got global logistics going on. But the thing is that Zakat Foundation, Zakat, puts a lot of emphasis into the slow, long, painstaking work of really connecting the dots and of really being holistic and organic and authentic, to having people on the ground in the places where they work that are really driving and directing the work there, really paying attention to the human experience of the people that work with them, that work for them, the people that are the recipients of this global aid. Zakat Foundation is very, very special in these ways. So, as we look to give back, as we look for opportunities to share, to do good, to contribute to positive movements around the world, please consider Zakat Foundation. It's a Muslim-led organization, but they don't only help Muslims. They don't use the work to proselytize. It's enough of an honor for us to just play a small role in contributing to the original organic dignity of human life around the world. So follow them on social media, Zakat US, hit up their website, Zakat Foundation, and find a way to jump in and engage. I'm telling you that, there's a lot of places that you can give your money and you have a lot of question marks about how it's spent. My personal experience and what we hear from Mukhtar in this episode is that he's had this experience as well, is that as much as these organizations can possibly be trusted, Zakat Foundation is one that we trust. And so we're very, very honored, grateful to be in partnership with Zakat Foundation. We talk so much on the podcast, and hearing our brother Mukhtar repeat it is really beautiful. But the things that we do on a day-to-day level, they have a great impact on us and on our state and on our mentality and on the energy that we bring in the world. They also have a big impact in terms of the global economics of how these things are produced. Mystic Man, men's hair care, beard care, grooming products are brought to us by a brother with a similar story as Mukhtar. Justin Mashouf is an Iranian-American brother who is a b-boy, a documentary filmmaker, a dad, super dope, just community dude. Just one of these people that you meet him and it's like, man, this guy is just really sweet and loving and beautiful and smart and courageous. And he has an idea that he believes in of bringing cedar, which again has tremendous natural healing and beautifying properties, bringing it into men's hair care products with the intention of raising our natural grooming from something that's mundane and making it something that's beautiful, that's sacred, turning it into a ritual, something that actually adds beauty and attention and intention to all of the aspects of our lives. And so head to mystic-man.com. You can check out all the products that they have made with sacred cedar. And then they also come with a handmade wooden beard comb. This is just dope, man. I'm saying, like, how can you front on this kind of stuff? So I mean, I've bought Aveda products and I've bought all of this stuff. I've tried all these different things and they're beautiful too. And Aveda, for example, they use natural products and so they're really well done. But are they connected though to the communities that produce this stuff? Are they connected to centuries of farmers that have lived with these trees? Is it a farmer who maybe it is, but I don't know. You know, you mess with Port of Mocha coffee, you know that Mukhtar is directly connected to his ancestors that produced this coffee. You know what I'm saying? You deal with Udamentary, you know that the brother Micah and his team, that they're going to Cambodia, they're going to Thailand, they're sitting with the women, the matriarchs of these families who have been harvesting and living with and producing these things for years. And our brother Justin Mashouf at Mystic Man is no different. This is the type of stuff that I believe. This is the type of stuff that gets me excited. You know what I mean? To not just try to pay the bills with these sponsors, but also to really partner with them because our message is similar. Our mission is similar. We overlap with each other. So head to mystic-man.com. Again, when you get to the checkout section, put in travelers and they'll give you a little something off of it because we're cool like that. And we're grateful to be in partnership with Mystic Man. It's really impossible to talk about these things without the holistic understanding of the history. And you're such an amazing ambassador, for coffee, for Yemeni coffee, and then also the fact that you have personally tied these different port cities together. Your people being from Mocha, but you were born in Liverpool, right? Which is a port city as well. And then you lived in Bed-Stuy when you were a little kid. And then being in the Bay Area is like such a beautiful connection. So can you take us back to the actual monk of Mocha, Sheikh Ali al-Shadali? And he's the first one of the first people to really encourage it being used as a spiritual ritual practice. Can you talk to us a little bit about that history?
Thanks. I actually I didn't even realize that I grew up most of my life around port cities. I don't know why. I'm just it's true. I don't. I just there's something about we tend to follow our ancestry without thinking about it.
Mm,
Um, that's another topic. But Sheikh Ali ibn Umar ibn Ibrahim al-Shadhili, he's an amazing person, and unfortunately, much of the world does not know of him. Um, he he was really the first to bring this beverage as we see it today, and that's now the second most consumed drink in the world after coffee. When coffee entered Europe, the drink of choice before coffee was alcohol.
hmm
And you see a correlation of the entry of coffee into Europe in the Enlightenment period, the Industrial Revolution, in these coffee houses in Vienna, London, Damascus, Cairo, Istanbul, Boston. People got together and drank something that heightened their intellect,
That's right.
that created a place where it was actually no class barrier. You can
hmm
go. Lloyd's Bank was started in a coffee shop. The American Revolution was literally a group of American radicals in a coffee shop called the Green Dragon in Boston, who were pissed off because they were being taxed without representation. And so they got super caffeinated and they went into the Boston Harbor and threw 90,000 pounds of tea in the water. And so coffee was always for me an powerful social movement for us to
And
think
I mean
about.
hip hop music, the black arts movement, the slam poetry, so much of what we appreciate, even the beatnik stuff that the white hippie kids were doing, a lot of that was related, has the origin has also been coffee shops as well.
I was just talking to somebody about a cafe in the North Beach, which is Little Italy, neighborhood of SF here in San Francisco. And around the 70s, 80s, this beautiful beatnik counterculture group of people came around cafes.
Mhm.
And there was a man who brought this culture around them. And awesome things came out of these coffee shops. One of the things that came out of that cafe in particular was Francis Ford Coppola wrote The Godfather in
Mm,
that coffee shop.
mm,
You
mm,
know,
mm.
so um, and I think it's an important history. So Sheikh Ali Umar al-Shadili, he is born in a city called Tarim, which is a very spiritual city in Yemen. He comes from a prophetic lineage that goes back to the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He comes from a family of learned scholars. He decides at that time period, many of the Sayyid class, people who were in the Hashimi class in Yemen, who would leave Tarim to go across Yemen. So every area, including my family's area, had a Sayyid from a certain family, Saggaf family, or Rifai family, or Junaid, and they would teach people, they would write the inheritance laws, they would be educators and different spiritual masters, and they had zawiyas, or they had spiritual corners throughout these cities. He decides to go to a city along the Red Sea called Mocha, Al-Makha, which is a city where the name comes from. And like I said, he goes to Mecca to teach, then goes to Cairo, and he's there for 11 years. He becomes a follower of the Sufi order tradition in the Shadili order tradition in Cairo of the great. And he comes back. He has a dream to go to Harar, Ethiopia, and that's where he has the first interaction with coffee.
Which is also a profoundly spiritual city as well. Like that's world renowned for being for its spiritual power of that city.
Yeah, when I first went there, I didn't know this, but it was founded by, I believe, 300 or so saints. They say super, it's amazingly spiritual city. So he goes back and he brings two things with him. He brings coffee and an Ethiopian wife to Yemen. Two good things you'll find in Ethiopia. um, and he plants coffee because coffee can't be planted in Mocha. It's too barren, desert, and it's too low to the ground. So he goes to an area and he called a province called Ib. Ib is pronounced IBB. If you ever get a chance, go on Google and just Google IBB Yemen and just look at the images. It looks like the Shire from The Hobbit. It's like the most beautiful green place, and it's my family's home province. And I didn't know this part of the history until I got into this journey. He plants two seeds in this province, and in an area now called Al Udain, which means the two branches, because two branches came out and grew from there. I had no idea that this was the reason why they named this province this.
Mm.
So then it spreads from there. And so Sheikh Ali, he writes a book, several books, but one of the books is called in Arabic, Inas al-Safwa bi Anfas al-Qahwa. This gives you the idea of what was the first coffee culture like. I'll read you some lines in this book, but the title is The People of Tasawwuf, of Self-Purification Through the Breaths of Coffee. Through the breaths of coffee. And you think about when you drink coffee, that after smell you have, that that your mouth. And I always enjoy that title. And he goes in it, he says in Arabic, قهوة البني يا أهل الغرامي. Oh coffee, oh story of love, or people of love. ساعدتني على طرد المنام. It helped me repel away my sleep. وعانتني بعون الله على طاعة الله والناس نيامي. And it helped me with God's help to stay awake and worship my Lord while people fell asleep. لا تلوموني على شربي لها إنها شراب السادة الكرام. Don't blame me for my intense love for coffee, for it is the drink of the noble people.
It's one of the things in Arabic love poetry that's always like, there's such a constant refrain. I know you're gonna think I'm crazy. If you've never tasted, they talk about like the tasting of love. They're like, like if you've never tasted the love of Layla, then you're gonna think I'm crazy because you've never tasted it. You know what I mean? So it's such a beautiful thing when it shows up in coffee, especially for people who have never tasted, like a lot of people have a bad taste in their mouth, to use that analogy, of religion. And it's like, yeah, if you've only dealt with counterfeit religion that's self righteous and judgmental and hierarchical, then of course you're going to feel that way about religion until you've tasted, until you've been with a spiritual master that loves everyone just for the sake of God. And they love what's best in us, and they love us even knowing the worst of us. And then, like, if you've only heard hip hop music on the radio, then and you don't like it, then I might say, well, okay, if you've never tasted Biggie, if you've never tasted hieroglyphics, if you've never tasted Lauryn Hill, then like of course you're gonna feel that way. You know what I mean? And people that have only tasted gas station coffee, diner coffee, even Starbucks coffee, that feel like, yeah, there's no reason to get, you know what I mean? It's such a beautiful, the beauty of tasting, and this feeling of like, don't blame me for this intense love that I have.
This is I really enjoy talking to you, Brother Ali, because I have to unpack it that way. You know how many times I've said this poem throughout the years? I've never thought of it that way, and it's so true that it's something that he was a coffee fiend. He's telling you like you have to try this. You're gonna think I'm crazy. You're absolutely right. And so he spreads coffee. Coffee was a spiritual beverage. That was his first tradition. They would get together in these these after long days of work in these rooms and remember God, and they would drink. They'd pass around this cup. It was a very communal thing. It was one cup actually. They'd pass it around, and if it was empty, they keep pouring it, and they would read these beautiful poems to God and sing. And they called it Zadu Salihin, the sustenance or the drink of the righteous. And some people called it in the beginning, the first few years, Khamr Shadaliya, the Shadali wine, actually, because it was a very Shadali drink, which I only knew that because this is another story, so it's very trip. I was in Cairo, first time going to Al Azhar University, one of the oldest universities in the world. And a friend of mine, Umar Nazmi, beautiful Canadian Egyptian brother, who leaves Canada, goes back to Cairo with his brother, Emin Ahmed, and they start a company called Cairo Coffee Collective. And if you're in Cairo, you gotta try that place. They have a cafe called Specialty Bun. And so they're very much into the spiritual history of coffee. They're on this journey with us. And so I took the path of farming and working with farmers, and they took the path of roasting in a cafe. And so he tells me to go meet him at this masjid. First time meeting him in person.
Mm.
Um, we in Egypt. We go the head the vice head of fatwa of religious rulings for Al Azhar, which receives thousands of like inquiries a day probably. We meet him. This beautiful Egyptian scholar who, I think about Egyptian scholars. There, a lot of them they have this humor to them. This
Mhm.
this this like really down to earth humor. As we walked, every single person he talked to, and we got to his office in Dar al Ifta, the house of fatwa. This huge building. I'm in this like, I'm like kind of like being like in Hogwarts basically, like in this structure, and we're sitting down there, and there was a master's student who was reciting to him, like going over his thesis, and he was just scared and trembling, reciting his thesis to him. And I remember like the sheikh was like, no, the axiom in Islamic law and and the scholar says this, and he's like being very technical with him. And me and my friends were in the corner, waiting to see what he wants with us because he just told us to follow him. And then there was like this, so and then he ended up brings me up and said, hey, so I'm writing a book on the history of Al Azhar. And as I was writing this book, I was reading on a chapter of a book by a scholar on the title of ta'assub in madhabs, basically like being only focused on one madhab.
Mhm.
And the chapter was titled The Event of Coffee, or The Incident of Coffee.
Mm.
And he asked me to read it, and it says, we were in a gathering with people in Mecca. This was on the 1550s in our times. And as we were sitting there, we were given a cup of a drink called coffee that people drank. And many of the scholars said this drink is haram, it is
Mm,
dirty, it is an
mm,
intoxicant, it is worse than alcohol.
mhm,
And then the story goes that the chapter is basically the scholar going back and forth with him and eventually reaching the conclusion that this is not an intoxicant. And in this chapter, he talks about the Sufi Islamic tradition, Sheikh Ali, the Shadli Tariqa, which I had no idea was this connected to this beverage. And Sheikh Ali he also begins this tradition of coffee being a beverage to help us connect to the divine. And there's actually a Fatiha. There's actually this supplication prayer for coffee, uh, and it goes. Which I'll recite and I'll translate some of it just to give you an idea. فاتحة القهوة لمشايخ الصوفية. It goes الفاتحة لمشايخ القهوة البنية. The opening of Fatiha to the scholars of the brown drink. والسادة علوية والصوفية. And our masters from the Alawi tradition and the Sufi tradition. وكل ولي وولية. And every saint, female and male, he mentions. ومن شربها بنية. And who drinks this drink. أن يصلح الله الطوية ويقضي الحوائج الدنيوية. That may God grant us ease and give us what we want in this life. بجاه خير البرية, through the maqam or through the station of the best of creation, the Prophet. And so for me, just to realize that there's a whole Islamic coffee, basically order Sufi tradition and Islam around it, it showed me that this drink has this other dimension to it that I think we're lacking in our times today.
So in terms of its relationship with European people, uh, I've heard you tell a story that there were Europeans that came to visit Yemenis and they were under the weather. And so they were given coffee as medicine. And this is one of the first Europeans that started singing the praises of coffee around the world. And the Yemenis have this drink that they're keeping a secret from all of us. And he's one of the first people that really was an early ambassador and tastemaker for people's interest in coffee in the European world.
There was one of my teachers. I wanted to gift him a gift, and so he's a coffee teacher. Basically, he has a wonderful uh, space here called Boot Coffee Campus. And I found on eBay this article from the 1800s. It was a precursor to the Christian Science Monitor in England, and it was about coffee and mocha. And it had this story that a Portuguese traveler, because the city of Port of Mocha and the Indian port of Gujarat, Surat in Gujarat, there were sister ports to go between. They were traveling, and many of the people on the ship were sick, and they stopped at the port of Mocha, and this Sheikh Ali, this Sufi scholar, was there, and being a Muslim, an Arab, being a person who was very hospitable, brings them over and gives them this drink. He said, "Drink this drink; it'll be good for him." So he drinks this drink, and he just becomes revitalized, and it cures him. And they say that was the first consumption of coffee by a European,
Mm,
and this was probably the 1400s.
mm,
And
mm,
so
mm.
he goes back to Europe, basically to spread the gospel of coffee and mocha. And they come and they start bringing ambassadors there. The Ottomans and the Yemeni kingdom that was there, the Mutawakkilite kingdom, began to create a very systematic and organized trading system for coffee and where it was sent, how they can come. And when coffee enters Europe, it's interesting. Like there's a book that I mentioned earlier, Coffee Global History. The current price of coffee now is $1 a pound for commercial coffee, which is basically slavery
Mhm.
for farmers around the world.
Yeah,
And you go to like the border here in California, San Diego, and you'll see Guatemalan farmers that I've met, coffee farmers. And I'm like, why? They've risked their lives because no one's paying enough money for their coffee. So when people say, why do you pay so much for coffee? Like when you decide to go cheap, someone has to pay a consequence to that.
that's right. That's right.
So he basically says that in the year 1730, in the Amsterdam exchange, a pound of unroasted coffee was $13. a pound, 12 times more, which if you extrapolate now, which means a cup of coffee could have easily cost $20. And if you look at pictures of European coffee shops in the 16 to the 1840s, they're opulent, they're beautiful, they're decadent, and they're places where people went to change the world. You're gonna go spend $20 a cup of coffee. You're gonna get access to a whole world. In Oxford, they call them universities because you can go and they would learn more in these cafes in school. And so Europeans were obsessed with coffee, and it wasn't a cheap beverage. It wasn't until coffee leaves Yemen, where it was grown for by free farmers, it's taken to Indonesia. This second phase is semi-slavery. Basically, the local chiefs in Indonesia, they worked deals with the Dutch for gifts, for money, and then the people around them would have to work a few days a week on these farms for free. They were not slaves, but they had to do this for the local, sultan or chief. That coffee was $9 a pound, a third cheaper. Then coffee finally makes its way to the Western Hemisphere, and it gets planted in Haiti, it gets planted in Suriname, Puerto Rico, and many like these places, like for example Puerto Rico, where they had in the ocean areas near the water was where they planted sugar, and then in the mountainous areas down they would plant the coffee. That coffee was just slavery.
Mm-hmm.
People were exploited, treated like cattle, and their labor was extracted, and they were worked to death. And that coffee was $5 a pound. And so, as that happened, they began to develop cheaper ways to consume coffee, and they developed instant coffee. And so it goes from $14 almost a pound to $5. And when it gets to Brazil, the fourth wave, which is mechanized industrial farming at a mass scale. It's where capitalism gets on steroids. And that coffee is $1 less a pound. And it's still the price now. And what happens is consumers are taught that coffee should taste bitter, should be
Right.
burnt, should be cheap, because it's been 200 years of this kind of, or at least 150 years of this cheap coffee. Where like all I'm trying to do, like we talk about the first and second, third wave, I'm trying to go back to the original wave,
Yes,
to the
sir.
free
That's right.
farmers in
That's right.
Yemen,
That's right.
and I'll end with this part of this history. I remember I was talking to James Freeman, the founder of Blue Bottle, and he told me, Mokhtar, in Cairo, Egypt, in the 1500s, there was 3,000 coffee houses that were serving single origin Yemeni coffee. What wave was that?
What wave
That's why
was
I call it
that?
the original wave.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's deep, man, brother. There's so much of this stuff that, I remember coming up in the hood in the 90s, we lived in food deserts and we ate garbage. And like what was available to us was, especially if we were trying to eat halal, we were eating like this like medicine-y tasting meat. We were eating like these little, hot sausages and, canned potted meats and things like that. And then we started hearing about this thing called organic food that was for like
Mm-mm,
hippies and rich white people. And we really looked down on it. Like, man, why am I going to pay, $5 for a tomato or for a pepper or something like that? And we were clowning it and all this stuff. And it really took for, dead prez to come along and for certain,
mm-mm.
Dr. Sebi and for people to say like, no,
Yes, sir.
this is this is the original way of growing food. This is what God gives us to come out of the ground, and this is what it really costs to pay people a livable wage to actually really enjoy things the way that they were meant to be. And it really was a re-education for us over time that I think people are starting to come around to now. And so what you and others have done with coffee is to really revitalize the original practices of indigenous people that lived on and with the land, and they lived with the living plants that they raised. And you know it's such a beautiful thing that we talk so much on this show about even oud, for example. That Udimentary is one of the sponsors. I know we share like a love for oud as well. A lot of people that love coffee also love oud. And it just made me think of the fact that the what makes oud beautiful, like you have aloes wood that grows in these different places, and then it's attacked by a fungus, and it develops these natural antibodies. Like what we love about the oud is actually an antibody that comes to fight the fungus, very similarly to the caffeine in the coffee bean
Mm.
that protects it from insects and pests, things like that. So and you've just given like a really really brief kind of history of coffee, but I think it's enough for people to start getting an idea. But your personal story is also one that I want to, we're just scratching the surface with all of these, but you coming from a Yemeni family, being born in Liverpool and then living in Bed-Stuy and then the Bay. Once you get introduced to coffee through Blue Bottle and learning about, how did you how did you get from that stage to where you actually traveled to Yemen to reconnect with farmers? What was that early stage like for you?
It was it's it's interesting how when you look back at your life, you start to see patterns and understand how things happen and why things happen.
Mhm.
I think I grown up and I wouldn't change anything. You know, I'm oldest of seven children. We grew up. My dad had a bodega in New York, and we lived pretty comfortably there but he didn't want to do that. He felt really guilty and selling alcohol to the community for the reasons you mentioned. Those food deserts, that were just, it's cheaper to buy beer than buy water. Like, why is there like so many liquor licenses in a 1 mile radius? These kind of things. So he decided to like leave that world, and I was really young, and I went from like, having Jordans and living my like, the life I liked, having my PlayStation and whatever I want almost, to the Tenderloin, which was like, I'll never forget the first moment we entered. We were at the stoplight with a car, and there was a homeless man who jumped on the hood of a white Mercedes and took a dump on the front of the Mercedes.
Oh
And I
no.
was like, "Welcome to the Tenderloin." And
Yeah, no,
if
Chappelle
you,
called it America's anus.
he said, "Yeah, if you
He
watch
said it,
for
nothing
what
tender about that tenderloin.
for what it's worth, that's one of my favorite comedy bits." He said, "I have never seen crack smoke so casually. Those crackheads smoking crack, drinking Starbucks, talking about politics."
I mean, it's
um,
100% true, man. Anybody that said like the tenderloin has to be experienced, man.
and it's not their fault. Like when Ronald Reagan stopped um, mental health programs,
Mhm.
much of the people there are just mentally unstable people who have issues.
That's right.
They're not. And all these cities around the world, country basically bring them over with the trucks and the buses to TL because we have social services for them, take care
That's
of them
right.
there.
Yeah.
It's sad. So like I grew up there, and I'm like, because I grew up in Brooklyn, you know, well, but to see that level of like, just there was of poverty, and we came into this house, 1 bedroom apartment, 7 kids, 2 parents, 9 of us, trying to figure out things, seeing just things that kids shouldn't be seeing. I saw
Mhm.
the most disgusting things in that place, and violence, extreme violence. I have doesn't live in my body. I'll have some kind of scar from something there, from fighting and growing up like that. And I didn't really read my first book until I think I was in the fourth grade. Um, and that was my environment. My friends who were caught up in this game and in this life, and I was. And my parents were very afraid of me, going down that path, selling drugs and getting into fights and getting into trouble. And they took me to Yemen when I was 12 as like a last resort way to save me, which till today am forever thankful for being able to spend time with my grandfather and living there.
The first time you went was after middle school, like around like junior high age?
My 12 years old, my parents, like, it was, they just was like, they didn't know what else to do. I was just caught up in a lot of things I shouldn't have been doing at a young age. And so when I was young, being a person of color, you don't have many roadmaps in front of you.
Mhm.
Either you're going to do some kind of sport activity. I mean, a short brown kid, I'm not gonna, I'm like, like, I mean, there's one point you grew up like, oh no, I'm not gonna be a basketball player. and and then so the other option is like get rich or die trying,
Right.
selling drugs, you know, doing illicit activities,
Mhm.
and that's when that's why my favorite album at that time was Ready to Die.
Mhm.
And like you hear certain songs like, if you don't know that life, You hear a song like "Suicidal Thoughts," you know, and you're like, why would someone say these kind of lyrics? What
Right.
would make someone do that? If
Right.
you hear like, any of these kind of songs, and Nas also, Illmatic really paints a picture of what it means to live in that society, in that environment, which, so that was one of these albums, like, were like my books. That's why I read growing up. These were very important to me. And so, yeah, I honestly believed when I was a kid, and that when by the time I'm 30 years old, I was going to be a super trafficker.
Yeah.
That was like in my head, and so then I ended up going to Yemen, and that was just had a profound impact on my life because I saw people with nothing and they were happy, and it made me feel guilty of my privilege because I always thought I have a horrible things, like, there are people who really have it difficult, and I'm like,
Hmm.
I have so many opportunities. And then I got a chance to live and be with my grandfather. May God rest his soul, because I think grandparents, they teach you, they teach you who you are, because I think our parents, there's so much friction between us because they're still trying to figure things out. But the grandfather is a bit removed and sees the bigger picture. You're the legacy of them. You're their legacy. They teach you how to live. They teach you a lot of things. And so I got really close to him, and I learned a lot of things about life. You know, things about being a man, things about integrity, values to have, hard work, honesty, what it means to have what it means to have a word, that your word is bond, what that means.
Hmm.
That's that was like the most important thing you have in this life. You could be the poorest person in the world, that you can have the most your word could be more powerful than anybody. So I went back, and then there's the thing that a lot of people don't know, but I'll share with you, is that um, my dad was afraid that I would forget how to speak English. And he put me in this like very rigorous Islamic school to become a Muslim scholar. He's like, you know what? You're gonna become a scholar now. Okay, great. And he gave me a box of books. I don't know, just like random books, like Huckleberry Finn. There's a book about how to write cursive, and one of these books, my father never read this book. I don't even think he knew it was in there. I don't know where he got this book, where he got these books from. It might have been a garage sale. It might have been some, who knows? But this book was one of the other books that changed my life. Was Alex Haley's autobiography of Malcolm X.
Subhanallah.
It was in this box, and it was
MashaAllah.
in my room, and I was in prison in Yemen. Basically, I felt like there's nothing for me to do here. There's no internet. There's nothing there. There's no MySpace. I think it was before MySpace even. And so one day I was like, you know what? Let me read these books. I tried to do the cursive thing. I'm like, I can't do this. And it's like, autobiography. What does that mean? What's all about? I don't even know what that word meant, you know. And so I opened this book, and I read a book about a person who, for the first time, I found someone to look up to, that I could relate to. These other heroes were people that didn't come from the streets I came from, didn't, have my experiences, and I found somebody who had to learn how to read in prison. Aardvark.
Yeah.
I remember just like reading that book 70, 80 times. I memorized like every page. At one point I could tell you, if you read a sentence, I could almost tell you what page it was on for the most part, like how
Yeah.
much
Hafiz.
I like took that book. And I remember Imam Zayd Shakir, may Allah, increase him, and all that's
Amen.
good. I told him the story. He said, you know what, you were in prison. That was your prison, being in Yemen. And I read that book, and so I felt, because I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe that like I was worth something, that I could be better, because my environment told me that you're going to be put in this box the rest of your life. You're a
Hmm.
statistic. This is
Hmm.
what you're going to do. Maybe you can become a technician. My teachers in the high school, middle school, told me this. You can become a technician, a plumber. You can become, which is nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful
Right.
thing to do, but that was all I was going to do. And so I read about somebody who became the most eloquent person I've ever heard speak. I don't know how else to explain. I'm a bit loss of words right now. But
Whose teacher told
I get
him you
emotional
should be
talking
a
about this
carpenter?
because
No, please, man.
I get emotional talking about this because I it brings up a lot of memories of feeling like, uh, feeling stuck, and your environment is define who you are. And I didn't want that. I always felt I wanted to be who I wanted to be. So I had grand visions of myself. I'm like, I want to travel. I want to do these things. I didn't travel anywhere. Read that book, you know, and then after that, I came back to the States. I decided I wanted to be like Malcolm, and I started to like go to school, take it seriously. I started to read books. That's when I read Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison's Bluest Eyes and a few other things. I started to open up my world to the environment. I also got That's the same time I got introduced to like Motown and soul music too. Just interesting for me, but that was my opening there. And then in college, I was really into movements and community organizing, and that's what I wanted to do. I was a community organizer, mostly around like we were doing work around the FBI's illegal targeting of people of color and Muslims, and that and there's a history of like COINTELPRO, what that did to the African American community, and then before that, even the Red Scare, then what's happened to Muslims. And I thought I would be a lawyer. That was like my kind of route that I was going to do, but along that route, I found coffee by accident, and I didn't understand business. I didn't know how that business. I knew business growing up, and I had to reform myself. I promised myself I would never go back to that life. Like it was to be easy for me to make money, make quick money. But my friends, they got locked up. Some of them are not alive anymore. And I promised myself I didn't want to do that life anymore. And it's hard. It's very hard to move and make that migration because you get pulled back easily. And I got saved a couple of times, but I always had this business acumen in my head that I learned in the streets. And and I started to read, and I learned about coffee, and it felt for me that this was what my past, my future, this is part of my legacy and history. I was just like, this is my path. It was more than a career, it was a calling. And then I just kind of, I followed that, and I feel very fortunate that I found this path.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. And we're all fortunate, man. I appreciate you, sharing as openly as you are. So we're having this dope conversation about coffee and how it's produced. One of the other things that Muslims have really focused on, and people of spirituality, is the power of coffee, not only for its caffeine but also for its beauty, and also for the way that it can really set the environment and remind us of the beauty of creation. That the caffeine in coffee comes from, it's a pesticide, and so the coffee that's grown at lower elevations are more susceptible to insects and to pests, and so it produces more caffeine to protect it. And then the ones that are, come to us from higher elevations, they have more sugar and they have less need for the caffeine, and so you just get these different variations in these like healing properties that come from nature. It's very, very beautiful stuff. Another one of these is scent, and Udimentary, Oudimentary, is one of these companies that's really looking to revive the spiritual, sacred practice of scent and the healing properties of these natural elements. So oud comes from aloes wood that's prominent in Southeast Asia, places like Cambodia and Thailand, etc. It also grows in Malaysia. These trees called aloes wood are infected with a fungus, and they produce a natural antibody to fight and protect the tree from the fungus. That antibody has these amazing healing properties, and if you can distill it, similarly to how you boil the coffee, you roast the coffee bean, you age it, you roast it, you you grind it, and then you have different ways of actually brewing it to bring out the beauty from the cherries, the original cherries. The same is true with aloes wood and with oud. So you extract this antibody in the aloes wood by either distilling the oil, and then if you wear this oil on your body, I mean, it just creates an aroma that's like nothing else that you've ever smelled. I wish I could give you this feeling, as Kanye said. Or if you actually burn the wood itself on charcoal, it just produces this aroma that has natural healing properties, but also it elevates whatever situation, whatever the environment is, to a place of profound presence and remembrance and longing and intention. And the scent itself is like nothing you've ever smelled. And it gets in your hair, it gets in your clothes, it gets in your beard, it gets in your drapes, it gets in your furniture, it gets in your carpet, it gets in your walls. I mean, it's profoundly powerful and potent. So head to udamentary.com. They have a variety of products that I'll just tell you, you get what you pay for. So find the area that you're able to jump in. When you get to the site to the when you're actually checking out, put in travelers and you'll get a little something off because me and you are cool like that. But I'm telling you, do yourself, your heart, your senses, your community, your family this favor and check out udamentary.com. We're really grateful that you're checking out the podcast. And that means that most of the people that listen to this podcast learned about the work that we do through the music that we make. We also do learning series. We have one called Blood on Beats, How to Die Writing a Song, where we spend a month with a limited number of seekers, writers, and we dig in. So we have these sessions, several hours every week of group time, and then we also have a Slack channel where people can drop their work and share notes, and there's ongoing communication. I want it to be really interactive. So that's just one of the learning series that we do. We also have limited edition merchandise and vinyl and clothing and jackets and all of these things. There's stuff that we produce that we really intend to be a communal thing. No involvement from the music industry, no involvement from anyone other than me and a small team of people. Brendan Kelly, BK1, who's the producer of this podcast and also my partner in Travelers Media, my man Last Word. Our whole team is really people that have this kind of holistic approach and really see it as a communal. We're not entertainers. We might be entertaining because God made us fly, but we're cultural workers. This for us is about culture, which is about building community and really just acknowledging all of that. That's how it all ties together. So I say all that to say, head to brotherali.com because that's the best place to actually engage with what we do. Social media is cool, but they control they're literal gatekeepers. You know what I'm saying? That decide how many people see our posts based on how much traffic is going to generate for them on a particular day. If you head to brotherali.com, you can sign the mailing list. That's free. You can check out all of the stuff that we do in the different sections. If you look at the catalog area, because there are like little descriptions of each of the albums that you're not going to find anywhere else. Each one of the projects that help tie things together and give some context and background. Then also, if you go to the section called Join, we've got what we call a caravan. The people in the caravan, there's different levels to support and participate. Man, we just did a 3-hour Zoom call with the people at the highest tier of the caravan, and we've got a Slack channel there. And we did a 3-hour conversation with the people that were free to hop on this Zoom call. And we talked about everything from our journey in therapy to our relationship with vinyl to our, early memories of music to, there are people in this community that come from the different communities that I'm blessed to be part of. And there are people that come from different walks of life that would not know each other. And I don't want to start dropping people's, identities and, experiences and stuff. But suffice it to say, there are people in this group that now have some level of intimate connection with each other that they would never have known each other were it not for this particular group. And that's a testament to the communities that made me and that produced me and that poured into me. So head to brotherali.com, sign the mailing list, and check out this caravan because, you know, there really is some dope stuff going on there that's an extension of all of the work that we do. And we're grateful for all of your support up until this point. And thank you for checking out the Travelers Podcast. When you started to when did you first get the idea that you were going to travel to Yemen for the specific purpose of reconnecting with the growers in Yemen and the people that grow coffee there?
I mean, I was always a dreamer. My friends used to make fun of me growing up. Like I always had random ideas, and I was just like I was always a weirdo in that sense. I just like the books I read in that time too. I was really young. Were like Harry Potter and like these like magical books of like I believe in just like magic. I don't know, that you can somehow like, or at least I wanted to as a maybe defense mechanism. And so initially, honestly, I didn't have this whole idea was not like it was not like some grand plan. It was just I think in the beginning stages, I was afraid to say it out loud. I just was like in my heart, I was like, I'm gonna do this thing as a hobby. Okay, I'm gonna start taking some time to do this. And then I started reading the books. I started listening to videos, going to some events here and there. And after like maybe 4 months, I was in Yemen. I told my family I was gonna go help my grandfather and maybe get married. And my family was like, oh, they were so excited for me because they've been trying to get me married since I was 15. In Yemeni years, I should be a grandfather. And so I go there, and that first trip in 2013, I went to 32 regions in Yemen that grow coffee. Like I spent about 4.5 months go, and then when I came back, I had met one of my friends who he did business in produce. I told him this idea, and we started this path, and my business story is a whole other story that's like has ups and downs, twists and turns, and things that I had to learn the hard way just because I didn't get an MBA. But to develop myself as a CEO, as a founder, there was a huge gap I had to learn, and it started with just learn about coffee, how to become a coffee taster, how to be a farmer. You see, like you and I grew up in this urban like concrete jungle. Like the only thing I knew about nature was like Avatar. Like we didn't know about like how to grow. And Grace Lee Boggs, she's an amazing civil rights activist, passed away. She talks about the importance of teaching inner city kids how to farm and plant because it teaches you patience, nurturing something, reaping the benefits of your hard work, like things that I grew up, talking fast and moving fast. But it just like I had to take time and learn these things, and
Hmm.
it took many years, to really figure out. It was like a video game. Every level was a new person I had to master, a new thing. I had to learn about tasting and coffee flavors. I had to learn about farming, supply chain management, all the crooks and And actually, I wanted to mention like rudimentary had an important part in my life because they were the first connection to me in this world of coffee. The first pour over I saw was there, Micah. The
Mm.
first the idea of like going to origin, like why do you guys go to Cambodia? Why are you guys going to Indonesia? Why don't you just make a phone call? And he's like, no, you have to go because there's crooks and there's thieves along this, and they're all gonna, you gotta like go straight to the source. And it reminded me of that movie, American Gangster with Denzel when
Yeah.
Frank Lucas goes goes straight all the way to Vietnam, to the jungles in Cambodia to get, heroin. And so I looked at that, and so I understood the drug game. I knew, okay, it costs like $1,000 to produce a kilo from Colombia, from Medellin, and 3,000 to ship it to like in Miami, San Francisco, wherever, and then you can sell it for 50 grand. I knew like how people distributed drugs,
Hmm.
but I didn't know about coffee. And so when I made the connection, I'm like, oh, this is the same thing. Instead of Blue Magic, I'm gonna sell the blue bottle.
That's a brand name, I guarantee
Pepsi, that's a brand name.
you. Right, right, right. Yeah.
Oh gosh, that was a good movie.
Mm.
So that's the thing I tell like I don't do like corporate talks or these kind of things, but I do talks to high schools, middle schools, and also business schools. Like a lot of business schools teach my book, but I talk to high school kids. I'm like, listen, like that trap game, the drug game,
Hmm.
it is the same thing. You learn skills
Hmm.
that are important. You
That's
just
right.
gotta sell something that's legal. That's all you gotta do. Caffeine, I'm still a drug dealer in many ways. Caffeine is a drug. It's a psychoactive drug. Um, but it's a legal drug. That's the difference. And I'm very proud of like the things I grew up. Like these movies, these songs,
Hmm.
they have lessons. Like I mean, the Ten Crack Commandments. Like those. That's what they.
Right.
That's what they teach you in business school.
I know that one of the
In
early
different
times
words,
that you
though.
went, to bring beings out of Yemen, that you were in danger, and like you were there during one of the times that the fighting was really bad. And what are you able to share with us about that particular moment in trying to, get out safely from Yemen?
Growing up, we saw violence growing up. First time I saw AK-47 was not in Yemen.
Mm.
You know, the first time I saw people dying, it was not, gun violence. Actually, in many ways, I felt much safer in Yemen. Just here, I mean, the idea of someone going to a school and shooting kids, like Yemenis, like I have friends, farmers, who text me like every
Yeah,
time there's a school shooting.
yeah,
How's your family? Are you guys okay? From Yemen on WhatsApp. And so we have a horrible violence here. But to that point, I never experienced war. So I'm there doing my thing in coffee, and I tried not to see what's going on because I had this vision, this path I'm taking. I felt like I was being guided by God on this thing and being protected. And then March 25th, 2015, this war began, which is still happening till today. It's been 8 years now. And I remember waking up hearing these explosions. I was like, what's going on? I go outside and I saw it looked like laser beams being shot in the sky. They were anti-aircraft machine guns being shot, Saudi fighter jets. And you're like, they're just dropping around you. The earth is shaking. Like people are like, I never experienced that kind of violence ever, or that feeling of not knowing if I would live to see the morning. Real certainty around death. Having to send my parents like goodbye letters. I really feel bad that my mother had to read those messages. It's not something you don't want. And so after that first, few days, it's sad that like people normalize violence. You
hmm,
normalize, things like that, and it's almost like a defense mechanism your body or mind creates to help you keep going.
right,
And that's why oftentimes people who have trauma they're the funniest. They use
absolutely.
that way as a way to cope with their situation. Um, and you see, because we have to laugh through it. You have to laugh through all the bullshit. So I remember just like living through that. Having to live through that was very difficult. Uh, being being kidnapped twice, being detained, being thinking that you would die. Like seeing people die in front of you, just being around violence like that, having to have a gun, having to have a gun loaded. Having to just like Uh, it took me many years of therapy to even like I couldn't go into a restaurant and sit with my back against people. I would see license plate numbers. I remember like even now, like I was with my friend driving the other day, and I didn't even notice I did this, but I kept noticing planes. Like, oh, look at that plane. That's like oh, look at that one. He's like, how come you notice these planes a lot? And in Yemen, we don't have an airport in the capital. We just opened like a couple months ago. So when you hear airplane, it means it's not a good thing. You're gonna die, or someone around you. Or you hear fighter jets, and so like it's a reality that many people deal with around the world, and it was difficult. Like I just came back from Yemen. I was trying to. I was really trying to have this conversation with you in Yemen. The internet is very difficult, and the way I have to move around there. But every time I go back, it's very difficult. It's the risk you deal with like things, but it's my people. I love what I do. In the villages, I feel very safe and very happy because I disconnect from everything. It's a place where I go um, to connect with myself, with God, and I love being in these farms. There's a powerful way of people who live uninterrupted. This beautiful relationship. That They take care of the land takes care of them. It's just my favorite
Hmm,
place to be. And so I would live
hmm,
there forever if I could,
hmm.
but I have to eventually leave to do things for them, for the farmers. So that was just like it's hard for me to explain. I don't talk much about it. I feel very comfortable talking to you. I have a connection with you, and I can be open to you about this stuff. It's not something that I romanticize. I don't post pictures of my guns in Yemen on my Instagram. I do try to give people a positive perspective on being Yemen, but I do every like 10 posts. I'll post something sad what's going on here, so they can, hey, this is not the best place to live. Is these people who are struggling. Um, but yeah, it's like I don't promote like this kind of Indiana Jones kind of like lifestyle or tell people like, I have like bodyguards or walk around with like guns or, it's
Hmm.
not something that people should live that way. I wish I didn't have to do that in Yemen, but that's
In
just the way
terms of
reality
what
is.
your intention is there and your work in Yemen, um, my understanding is that for you to reconnect with Yemen and that you found that so many people, like so many of the coffee growers in Yemen, a lot of them had lapsed. A lot of the people didn't realize that their beans were appreciated and that Yemeni coffee was the origin of coffee. This whole coffee trade that's going on in the world that they had been largely left out of. And so my understanding is that your intention to go there was to help to revive the practice of some of the original coffee growers and to do it in a way that uplifts the people, that reintroduces the world to the beauty of Yemeni coffee in a way that involves the land, involves the people, and to really empower the people, to give them a seat at the table, to give them a voice. And so if you could talk just a little bit more about what is the mission that you have for coffee in Yemen?
Yeah, I never thought about having a business in the beginning. I thought it would be a nonprofit. I'm gonna go help
Mhm.
farmers because I grew up, I worked in nonprofit work in the U.S. And I worked at a nonprofit that did community service work, community organizing. We did legal clinics, for like newly immigrated people and social services. But what I found with the nonprofit system was that it actually didn't help. It wasn't sustainable. As soon as the funds were gone, people went back to like being poor. It also created a sense of form of dependency. And honestly, a lot of
Mhm.
foreign governments give these kind of aids
Mhm.
because they want to keep
That's right.
people down and not being able to empower themselves economically. I was like, how can I get people to become masters of their own destiny? We don't need to get handouts from people. And I decided to figure out how to do a business. And so that was my first goal, was to try to shorten the distance between producers and between consumers. You got farmers, and then you got collectors, and you got mill and exporter. You have an importer. You have a roaster. You have a cafe, right? This is the coffee supply chain. Every person is making money and trying to squeeze profits, and the farmer is the one who gets screwed over the most,
I'm in the
unfortunately.
music business, brother. I relate to that.
And so like I was like, okay, how do we get rid of these middle people? What can we do to make it shorter? And especially coffee is cool because now the roaster is trying to buy directly, direct trade, and there's still these middle people. So unfortunately, they can't buy directly from Yemen because of the physical barriers, the language barriers, and the safety issues. So I was like, okay, I'm from there, and that's why I think that people of origin who live in Western countries, people from producing countries, many of the people that I mentor and I help, different companies. A friend of mine who's doing a pomegranate business from Afghanistan, from Kandahar, they have amazing pomegranates. A friend who's doing chocolate from Cote d'Ivoire, West Africa. Another person who's doing leather from Morocco. Like, we are our best storytellers. We can tell our stories better than a
Mhm.
white person who goes and discovers chai in India, you know. And so
That's right.
I was like, I can do this, and I went and I had to learn how to do that though. So that was hard. So we did that, and thankfully, like we were able to find like Yemen had much potential in its raw, like natural qualities. It just because of every person was mixed. Okay, to give a bad analogy, every person was mixing it up. So by the time it got to like the consumer, it was just like watered down. It wasn't real, high quality coffee anymore. If you know what I mean. So I was trying to.
Yeah, no, I'm saying back to the Nicky Barnes thing, like they were stepping on it. You
It was
know what I mean? They were stepping on the blue
it
magic, man.
it was step, and I was like, okay, let's because every farmer has a different cultivar, a different elevation, different microclimate. The trees around him, the birds, like everything affects that flavor, and then you're gonna mix it with some stuff along the route. And so I went and I created this value chain to get the coffee to the consumers, and we produced, which I never intended on being this kind of company. We produced like 2017, it was rated the number one coffee in the world, and I never imagined my coffee would be sold at these. I didn't even know that it would be sold at $16 a cup. I didn't like when we launched our first launch with a company here, Blue Bottle, 2016. When they told me it was in this big marketing meeting, and they said that the cup would be $16. Like, whoa, like why you guys? That's too expensive. Like I felt really angry. Like no, like it's because we're paying you this much money. I'm like, I didn't understand the price economics at that time. Like they're paying $2, $3 a pound for coffee. I started with the farm, like, what do you need to make money to be happy and live a dignified life? Okay, that's what we're going to charge these people now. And I was charging them $50 a pound, you know, and I didn't, and I created like a new category of coffee for that, and people actually appreciated it, loved it because they taste the flavor. And so then that evolved to like us, growing this business and then eventually roasting our coffee and working with roasters around the world. And then we have a nonprofit, which we started called the Mocha Institute, because I was like, okay, there are people who want to help support our work that don't drink coffee, or there are things I want to do that don't make sense as a business. I want to plant 1 million trees a year. I want to do these kind of things. So we just actually launched our first project, which is a national coffee auction. The
MashaAllah.
goal of this is basically, okay, I've helped some farmers develop themselves. Like now they don't need to sell to me anymore. They can sell directly to a consumer. So we want to create, but the problem is they don't speak English. They don't have a passport. Let's create a platform for you guys to sell directly to consumers. And it's going to be in August next month. We just launched like last week. So I'm actually glad we did this interview today. This is like the first time I'm doing like a PR thing about it. I have a few other things lined up in a few weeks, but it's a really radical thing that's never happened in Yemen history, where coffee farmers that now they can just go directly. One of our actually sponsors for this is the Cat Foundation, and which I'm one of the people that believed in our project. Mr. Demir, he loved Yemen. The people we got to work with on that project, and it's the Cat Foundation. This is like they don't even know I'm saying this, but they're a very nuanced Muslim organization, I would say,
Yes,
to
absolutely.
to basically have the kind of vision to do that for us. We didn't. It was our first project. We haven't done anything so. It's pretty. I want to thank them for doing that. And so this auction is like my evolution of what my story is now. For that, we're also working on my company now. We're working in other origins: Ethiopia, Panama, Colombia, Indonesia. Basically, we want to work wherever there's troubled hotspots. I believe that it's strange. The best coffees come from places of conflict. Ethiopia, Mindanao in
Mm,
Philippines,
mm,
Chiapas, Mexico, Yemen. It's just
mm,
like, and
mm.
so like I want to use coffee as a way to heal and grow people. And it's not charity. This is
Yeah,
where I am right now.
yes.
And I haven't really told people this is a chapter that we're working on to build. We haven't launched in these origins yet, but we're working. Like most of the people that came to me when I started working in coffee in the last 6-7 years have been farmers asking me to like help them, and I'm like, okay, sure, you should do this way. And I've really learned a lot about fermentation and process techniques, and I show them, like, I'm open source here. Do this. I'll find roasters who buy our coffee. I was like, hey, you should buy this. My friend, Janine from Burundi has amazing coffee. You should get her coffee. Or my friend Felipe from Brazil, get his coffee. So and so. But still, a lot of these roasters are still I have a vision where we're trying to get coffee to a high elevated place where, like, if you wanted something special, you if you want like a cheap cologne, you can go get something cheap. But if you want like a Cambodia reserve oud, you go to Rudimentary, get something special from them. That's kind of what I want to do.
That's right. Yes. Man, how many of the farmers that you work with are women?
75% of farmers in Yemen are women, and most of the city men work in the cities or in the diaspora abroad. And early on, I would work with these men to train them, and the coffee quality was just like not moving forward. So, like, I kept like, guys, like, okay. So then I said, okay, in the villages, women have much more agency. It's more matriarchal. Their family, their own love of land. So I required every cooperative we work with that women have to be on the board. And literally, Brother Ali, like, the quality changed overnight.
Of course.
And I mean, there's a reason why women live longer than men.
Subhanallah. Subhanallah. So the like I know you don't like to talk greasy like this, but I just, just because I want it to be on the record, talk to me about some of the accolades of the coffee that you've been able to help bring out of Yemen.
You have to forgive me because I'm not really great at these, but I'll do my best. I um I don't know. It's just like, it's strange for me. Like, it's strange for me to because so coffee, especially coffee, is a very pretentious, very like difficult thing to get into. Everyone is like
Hmm.
a master. There's so much science. and to get recognition in this space is very difficult. Like you're talking about people who spend, their lives on a specific. I'm gonna be. All I'm gonna do is milk. I'm gonna figure out milk, or I'm gonna figure out like roasting science, or fermentation, yeast. Being a yeast professional and just on all these different parts of it. And so for me to like start from like the ground up, literally, and like with nothing. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Like I remember the first time I went to a coffee farm as an adult, like older person, adult. Because as a kid, I would go, when I was 12, pick cherries with my grandmother, but I didn't know that those were coffee. Because in the US, we get coffee from the espresso machine. That's how disconnected we are from our food. So I go as a kid, as an adult now, in 2013, my first visit to a farm, and I'm like in this farm and looking at these trees. I'm like, wow, like I'm actually here. Like I'm like, a few months ago, I was on my sofa on YouTube, just like Googling things, and like, now I'm at this farm.
Hmm.
I'm like in this village. I'm on top of this mountain. I'm having this moment with myself, right? And this farmer comes up to me, goes, "Hey, Mokhtar, I'm sorry to bother you. The coffee trees are actually over there." it it wasn't even a coffee tree, brother. It was like, and I looked at him, and this is where my street smart skills came in. Going from Bed-Stuy and in the tent, I was like,
Uh,
"Hey, Mohammed, I know these aren't coffee trees, but these trees are in close proximity to coffee trees, and that affects its health."
right, right,
Which
right,
actually is true, but I did not know that then. And so I had to
right.
learn everything from like the ground up, and it was very intimidating. Like I come from a place where like we don't know about farming, and I had to learn that. And so, to be where I am today now, where like our coffees are recognized internationally, like we've won, like the Coffee Review is one of the most important coffee rating organizations. They've given a 97-point coffee to like 16 coffees in the history of 30 years. We received two 97-point reviews. We were the number one coffee in the world in 2017. Like, last year or this year, I was referenced in Jeopardy as like a company that has like this company that has the world's highest rated coffee. I, like it was just like I couldn't believe that I was on like a TV show like that, And so the book being like a New York Times bestseller, being taught like hundreds of schools, and I don't even know how many languages it's in, and like it's a trip for me also to be able to connect with people that like that like you and others that I look up to, but for the most part, it's just I never thought my life would have this kind of impact or this kind of meaning that young people who grew up like me can read my book or learn about my story and like you know message me. And I have a hard time reading the messages, honestly. I have this lot of imposter syndrome that I deal with, and even if I go to therapy, for which I go to therapy, it's still difficult for me to read somebody who like when you're taught for a long time as a kid that you're worth nothing. You are a
Hmm.
person who has limited avenues, and you're never going to be able to live this kind of life. And for
Hmm.
people, it's just like even your own community. My family, like being a founder, also like for a long time, people were very concerned about me. Like, what am I doing? Why am I going to Yemen? My family risked their lives to come to this country for the American dream. For me to decide, no, I'm going to go back and be a farmer. So it's a very lonely path. And as much as you get these accolades, like you put the work in and you put time, but even that, it's not about like how much work you put in either, because there are women in Africa who are the hardest working people in the world, and it's a mercy that you get from God or from whatever you believe in that gives you these kind of blessings. It's not about how hard you work.
Hmm.
It's really a blessing,
Hmm.
and I can lose it in a blink of an eye. And I have someone who I've experienced death, very close death several times in my life, and I feel every day is extra credit for me. You know, when I heard
Hmm.
Malcolm X say, "I'm a man who believes I died
Hmm.
20 years ago," like I
That's right.
that really resonates with me. So, I'm thankful. These accolades. If you can Google my name and find out stuff, but just for me, my most important accolades for me are just my family, my community, being proud of like what I do. These are the things I care about the most, especially my parents, and just that's I think that's just people I grew up with who know me, who really know me, saying they're proud of me. That
Yeah.
means a lot to me.
Well, man, let me be one of the many voices to just say, man, I am extremely proud of you, and I'm extremely grateful for you. The way that you are able to tie together all of the things that I care about most, the all of the things that you've synthesized with your experience and the lineage and legacy of your family and your people and the Islamic tradition and the best of the spiritual tradition, um, along with the best of American music, American the black American tradition of spiritual music, gospel music, joyful music, painful music, teaching music. There definitely is a connection between these poems that you talk about, these like teaching poems that we have in the Islamic tradition, and a lot of the best of hip hop music. They absolutely are tied and connected to each other. The work that you did in organizing and political and community organizing in America, inspired by the Black freedom struggle. So many of us, so many people take from these different traditions and never care enough to acknowledge them and never understand the way that they're all being pulled together and the way that they're feeding us. And so those messages that you get from people, everybody that I talk to on this show are all people who have done what they've done as acts of service, whether it's Cornel West or Ilhan Omar or yourself or Chuck D or Sa Rock and Mumu Fresh, Mamuna Yusuf, and you hear from so many people like, man, when the accolades that they get or the praise that they get is impossible to hold. You know what I'm saying? It's like impossible to claim. But the reality is that, all the people that have inspired us, um, we become part of that lineage by trying to honor it, and it really is all Allah doing all of it. So the only way to understand it for all of the people that I've spoken to is just that really this all is the divine
Mm-hmm.
working through us and allowing us to be part of the chain. So it's interesting to me that so many people saw the title of the book, The Monk of Mocha, and then assumed it was you. And you're saying, no, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me. But to the degree that we honor the people before us, we do become their representatives. We do become their khalifa. So in the world now, it's not a claim that you've made, but it's a role that you have been ushered into by the divine, that you are the representative of the monk of Mocha. You're one of the representatives of Sayyidina Sheikh Ali ibn Omar al-Shadali. You're one of the people that keeps that work alive and
Trying
keep
to spread the gospel.
yeah, man. And I mean, and that's really what it comes down to, man. That's really what it comes down to. And so, for all the sacrifices that you continue to make and everything that you've been through, man, I'm very, very, very grateful to you. And also, when we lived in America, we had a subscription to Puerto Mocha, so we had a box of beauty that showed up every month. You know what I'm saying? That we could share with people and have in our gatherings. But man, I'm just I have so much admiration for you and respect for you, and I just love you beyond
I don't
words,
want to
man.
cut you off, but I just thank you. It means a lot. Like, thank you for those kind words. I hope to be as you think, and I'm very thankful for just everything, the beautiful, the ugly, the struggle, the whole thing. And I hope that people listen. If we can take anything from this, is that try to be more conscious consumers. We have a lot of problems in our world, and sometimes I can only feel like, what can I do? There's so many problems, small things, little things that millions of people do will have these big effects. So just the clothes you buy, the coffee you drink, making sure you can buy coffee that's ethically sourced. And I would just say, like someone who works with people, as producers in Yemen and other countries, we don't really want your pity or sympathy. But what we want is your solidarity. And the only way to get that is to understand that your struggle is connected to our struggle. And so that's my only message. For anytime I have any talks I do, I try to just tell people, just buy better coffee. It's good for you. It's good for those people. Um, and then once you do, you're gonna feel like, I should have done this so many years ago. I was so afraid to get into it. And then I'll try to my best to send you some more. Read those books I mentioned. I'll send you more things, Brother Ali, if you could. But I really appreciate you because you're like every circle of people, there's always a coffee person. And in hip hop, there's a few people like you, but you're like one of the most people I know who really is a coffee person, like proper coffee person who has a deep connection to this beverage, spiritually, physically. And so I really appreciate you for mentioning coffee the way you do and for giving me this, allowing me on this wonderful platform to tell a little bit about that story.
Hadra, Sheikh. Hadra. Subhanallah. What are the best ways for people to stay in touch with you and your work? I mean, we follow you on social media, but in terms of the new projects that you're rolling out, what are the best ways for people to follow you and to support the things that you're working on?
I mean, my social media, handle Mokhtar Alkhanshali. You can follow that, and there's a lot of projects that I'm working on in the media world, and there's a few that I'm definitely going to reach out to. I've already put you in the pitch decks for some of them, but it's really around just like helping tell stories of people who we interact with every day through beverages and through things we consume, yet we don't really see them, and giving them that platform. And there's some really cool things. And I think the future of food storytelling in particular is people from the global south telling our own stories. I can learn, a white person can teach me how to make a special, like, curry from India. But when I hear from a friend of mine who tells me his grandmother's recipe and talks about partition and what happened there, there's a powerful stories. And I'm really excited to like try to be one of those storytellers. But just my social media, you can follow that, and then the Mocha Institute if you want to know more about the work we're doing, and if you can support. I'm not really good at asking for money, but the Mocha Institute is something I really do care about. It's the Mocha Institute is our website.com.org, and also the Mocha Institute with the K, Mocha, is our Instagram handle. And you can kind of see what's happening. We're dropping every day photos and videos of this amazing national auction that's been almost 2 years in the making now. But those are my two ways of following. Just if anything, the for me the most important thing, and I think sometimes we don't realize how powerful it is, just a positive prayer. That would mean a lot to me.
MashaAllah.
I just want to end by saying, I truly love you, brother. I truly do, and I really am happy to see you happy, and I pray for you and your family and your uh, to always be protected and just to live a life of comfort, inshallah, in this life and the next. And I pray to interact with you and to show up in your life more. That's my intention this next year.
Ameen. 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 I pray the same for you. And man, don't threaten me. Do it. Come on with the come on.
Oh, inshallah.
I love you. Inshallah. We'll see you soon.
Love you too. Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much to our dear brother Mukhtar Alkhanshali. Check him out on social media. Also, you can follow the Mocha Institute to see all of the work that they're doing. Please check out all of the things that the different articles and whatnot that he mentioned. A really good place to start is the book that Mokhtar did along with Dave Eggers, called The Monk of Mocha. It's available on all of the services you can get. I am legally blind, is partially blind, so it's best for me to mess with books in audio format. I was so happy when they had this book on audiobook on Audible that I could go in there and check that out. But it's a really incredible read. It's really entertaining. They do a really amazing job of tying together Mokhtar's personal story with the story of Yemen, with the story of coffee. He doesn't like to really talk about a lot of the things that he's been through, but it's an amazing story and a really harrowing tale of him going back to Yemen to in the attempt to revitalize Yemeni coffee and coffee farmers, not knowing whether it was going to be successful or not. And this really amazing moment where he's trying like hell to get some beans that he helped to produce out of Yemen to this big coffee conference. And he literally is trying to survive. Like his life is in danger. He was on the news doing it. And then he gets to this conference with these beans that he literally almost died trying to get out of Yemen. And they're rated some of the highest quality beans in the world. As a matter of fact, I think that particular one, they said, these are the best coffee beans in the world. It's an amazing story. And Mukhtar is a young dude. Like you kind of hear the way that he's talking, you hear that just that reality in our community that I'm maybe 10 or so years older than Mukhtar. You know what I mean? So there's times where he's showing me deference and things like that. But the reality is that, man, this guy is a legend, and he is an ambassador for coffee and for Yemen and for the world. And so very, very grateful to our brother Mokhtar for being so generous with his time and his wisdom and his story and all of the above. And he did open up a little bit more, and you hear him, being a little emotional and things like that. And that's what we do here. We hope to really just love people and care for them and care about them enough that, like, man, we see you and we appreciate you and we're grateful for you and we're grateful to you. And so people open up here. And so I'm very, very honored at that. Special thanks to Zakat Foundation and to all of our sponsors. Special thanks to Amna Mirza and Mansour Panawala and to Aida Rashid and to Darian Washington and to Last Word and to Amir Rahman and to all of the people that are really part of this beautiful thing. I want to give a special shout out to my man Chris Jeffords. If you've been around, you know that Chris Jeffords is, one of my favorite, very, very serious fans and listeners who turned into a family friend. Chris Jeffords actually gifted, when my wife got her master's degree, to become a therapist, Chris Jeffords actually gifted her, and by extension us and our family and our community, a subscription to Port of Mocha coffee. So we got the best beans on earth delivered to us every month. So special shout out to my man Chris Jeffords. Travelers Podcast is produced by BK1, Brendan Kelly, my mellow, my man, the one and only. And it's a production of Travelers Media. We love you. We appreciate you. We wish you all the best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.